we are just going to bring out director Tanya Wexler and actor Hugh Dancy. Roger taught me you never step on anyone's applause, so. We give a golden thumb, and after this movie, it's stationary. Tanya, this is a casting of Roger's thumb. Okay. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that.
Thank you.
And Hugh, one for you as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we are going to have a Q&A. If you two sit here, I'd like to call out Matt Zoller-Seiss and Sheila O'Malley to conduct the Q&A with you. Thank you. Thank you. And we can ship the thumbs to you, or you can take them with you. I'll bring it with me, but do you want me to take them backstage while you do this? Okay.
Thank you, Jess.
All right.
Right, where should we go?
That's the best award ever, especially for this film.
Yeah, I was wondering about the inappropriateness of making a thumb joke, but I think we're all clear now. So there's a title at the beginning of this thing that says, "This is a true story, really." How true of a true story is it really?
Well, I wasn't there. It's based largely in truth. So obviously we use the structure of a kind of screwball comedy, romantic comedy, but there was a doctor named Mortimer Granville. He did do manual massage de paroxysm. And we kind of composited about 3 doctors together, but some of the research we did quite a, well, there's all sorts of research that was done. You know what, I'm just gonna leave it at that, actually. But no, some of the research that we did, kind of suggested that I think the little motor was like the 3rd electrical patent. But yeah, women were diagnosed with hysteria all the time. We kind of got a little glimpse into the darker side of that. Women were given hysterectomies and committed against their will and all of that. But also both the massage and then the labor-saving device of the vibrator were invented very much to relieve hysteria. So yet again, the vibrator was invented for a guy, in a sense, as a labor-saving device. Yeah, there you go. But anything that works, guys.
It said at the end that the diagnosis ended, as something official in 1952, but what was the outcome? Like, how did this kind of fiction really break apart? Was it the rise of women's power? Or?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, when the vibrator stopped being a medical device and it was used in the blue movies, so basically porn, I think in even the 40s and 50s. And so I think when people kind of realized, that it was not just a medical device, that's when that part of it, in terms of the fiction of hysteria, I mean, I'm not sure it's ever fully gone away, right? People call women hysterical all the time.
Didn't have a kind of resurgence with Freud. I mean, took on a different, not a physical, but a psychological kind of diagnosis.
Right. Yeah, but I do think that people still say
That's the extent of my knowledge about Freud.
No, that's very good.
But he sounds much more authoritative because he sounds much fancier. Yeah, I don't think it's gone away. I think people still call women hysterical, erratic, irrational. I think, the fact that we haven't We don't have 50% representation, and we're 50% of the country or world. I'm not sure the trust in women's sound judgment has really fully been secured.
And I guess I had never really considered the root of hysterectomy, which is very sad and disturbing.
Hysteria means uterus
Yeah,
in Greek,
yeah.
so.
It's also interesting that the movie is called Hysteria rather than, say, the manual massage to paroxysm device or something.
The Jolly Molly.
Yeah, exactly. And you also could have concentrated just on the story of the doctor and his clinic, but instead you brought it's really this whole parallel narrative about women's rights, essentially, and also there's class issues. Can you talk about that? Why did you decide to do that? And what did you get from it that you couldn't have gotten if you just stuck with the clinic?
Sure. Well, I think we knew pretty quickly that a movie about the vibrator was a skit, right? And so as I kind of teed it up, I think it's really a film about denial. And I find denial hilarious, you know? And I think the little mini ducks scene kind of is the mini version of the movie in like a nutshell, which is the kind of, what are you gonna believe me or your lying eyes kind of thing. But so we wanted to understand, you know, the pathology, like pathological pathologizing of women, and then what kind of women who were, you know, kind of already ahead of that view were doing. And so that's why I wanted the contrast. But it's funny, the settlement house movement kind of found us. We were trying to figure out what Charlotte could be doing that was practical and engaged. And I grew up in Chicago. And, you know, near Hull House, not too far from Hull House. And then I noticed you have Hull House, you have Jane Addams Bookstore, which we milled around earlier, which is awesome. And so I was somewhat aware of the settlement movement just from that. And then it kind of found us when we were developing the story. And that just seemed to make the most sense. Once we found the core theme, you know, we just kind of dug in from there. So.
This is kind of for both of you and going a little bit on what we were talking about at the panel about rom-coms and setting the tone. To me, I mean, I think you set the tone with that really. It sort of gives you, okay, this is going to be, but for both of you, can you talk about how did you set that tone so that it is sustained and funny and moving? I mean, I was like, yeah, crying a little bit, roaring.
Well, I mean, the challenge for me, I realized pretty quickly with this movie, when in the couple of days of rehearsal or whatever it was that we had, was really trying to as much as possible, unify a lot of tones and those two quite different storylines, and really stretching between farce on one end and then taking in, obviously, something rather more serious. In other words, kind of connecting it to some of Maggie's scenes, really, and then, you know, romantic comedy somewhere in the middle. And that was really tough. I mean, it was, but it needed it to kind of drive the movie through. I think what I found in there, going back to what we were talking about, romantic comedy, was that it was just more interesting and more entertaining if Mortimer was not a sap, basically, and it's funny, but he's kind of reactionary, you know. I mean, really till late in the day with Maggie, just dropping kind of good, but nonetheless dumb sexist jokes, you know, which I'm not ashamed to say I introduced into the script. Because I thought you needed between them, in a way, what is in the more serious element of the movie, which is this battle of the sexes, which drives romantic comedy, again, when it works well. But yeah, watching it again just now, I think, God, that is a lot of movies in one movie, you know, and I'm in all of them.
The physical choices that you make are interesting too, and I wondered if you could talk about how you arrived at those. Like you're extremely specific in some of these takes. They made me laugh so hard. Like the first time that you're doing the technique, you look like you're trying to fish a coin out from under a couch. It's really interesting, and. You're sort of not looking, you know, kind of like. Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, do you arrive at that in rehearsal? I mean, that doesn't happen. That doesn't just you know, unless you're a genius, which you may well be. But there have to be some conversations that happen, right?
Physical comedy and comedy genius. There are things that didn't, for story-wise, make it into the film that Hugh would do. We had this one bit that we just had to cut where he's on the hunt for his job, or baby carriage, kind of, he's looking at the wanted ads, and this woman, and he did stuff, almost Chaplin-esque, where he could do things and he could make it look like they were happening to him, but then he was actually making the bit happen so that we could capture it on camera. It was unbelievable. I mean, you can't, with a movie where you have so many tones going on, and we knew that, right? People wanted to know, is this Benny Hill or is this Suffragette? Except that wasn't made yet. And I was like, if you took like Richard Curtis and Jane Austen and Merchant Ivory and they had like a movie baby, that's what I wanted to make. And it was Hugh, right, who was on, I think we shot 33 days, he was in 32 of them, who really...
But that one day was amazing.
It was amazing. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but the ability, because my kind of request of the actors was always, play it straight into the joke. Don't be too goofy, right? But you can't just play it like a drama, right? Somehow it has to be still funny, but you're not playing a big broad comedy. You're playing an authentic beat into an absurd situation.
But right, so that scene that you took, which was one of the pleasures of the movie, is these long extended takes when you're doing something. The best joke in the movie is the reality, right? And then the rest of it is dressing. But that stuff, when that first scene between myself and Jonathan, and when he's describing what he does, and there's all these kind of ridiculous double entendres, but it works. You don't have to do anything except keep a straight face, basically. And then the rest of it not needs help, but can carry that more, that kind of more florid stuff. So you have to, I'm just thinking of that quite long take now as I'm going through, and it's all very polite and it's nice. And then, you know that it's great because you're going to work up to spilling the oil, right? And then you realize that the guy doesn't have a clue what he's doing and he's terrified, But going to your coin and settee image, we had to work out. Again, we had this brief period of rehearsal, and a certain amount of it was given over to working out just the practicalities of how are these scenes going to work for the comfort of everybody involved, and I would say primarily the actresses, the amazing actresses who just risked embarrassment, as we all did, And so we had, we talked about how is that frame going to work, the device they have and the curtains and and the stirrups, and what are we, the practitioners, going to do? And the end result was, I can tell you now, the magic behind the literal curtain was just a sandbag, which you see a lot of on film sets, right? Sandbags are used to weigh down lighting stands and so on. So we had a sandbag in there that Jonathan and I were to give us something to lean into, if I can put it that way. And it is actually the case that both of us kind of developed like little blisters. Because, obviously that's a day's worth of filming and, boiled down into a few minutes of screen time. I'm just going to stop there, but, so some of it was comic choices and some of it was born of necessity.
When you're doing two angles on that scene, two actors who are in a scene where, the camera's pointed this way and then they do it all pointed this way, obviously common courtesy dictates that the other actor be there for the other person's close-up. How did that work in this case? Are you just going through the motions, so to speak, again, or are you,
That's a very good question.
Are you showing them a flip book that you made during lunch, or what are you doing?
No. There's a lot. Thinking about it now, it's such a specific and really fraught thing that you're asking those actresses to do, and they're asking them to be funny, but be real, and also just to do something, very intimate. So I doubt they were thinking much about us. But I'm sure we were there working away, I'm a professional.
Moving on to production design.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you
I can embarrass you even with production design.
a little bit about the look of the film.
Yeah.
Tell us about the look of the film, how you decided on this. It's shot in widescreen.
Correct.
It's shot on 35 millimeter, which, you know,
Super
obviously
35.
more. Okay, great. And there was more of that being done at the time. What was this, 2010 or 9?
Yeah.
Obviously, more films being shot on film then than
Yep.
they are now, but still, that's a choice
Correct.
that you make, and probably some people would have argued against that.
We were on the bubble, I think it was really the last year or two, where film as an acquisition medium was still just better. You know, and I'm not kind of I'm not wistful for the past, because mostly I just like what gets the picture that I want, right? I don't care about like chemicals versus ones and zeros. It doesn't matter to me. But it was just for the money, right? Because I think you could get, you know, that was, you know, certain Star Wars movies were being shot, but you had to spend so much money to paint the ones and zeros to make them look good enough that it still was a kind of about the same. And the DP I wanted to hire was Sean Bobbitt, who at that time had just done Hunger. And then he went on to do Shame and 12 Years a Slave, and he's amazing. But he and I just chatted and said, you know, we still think film looks better as an acquisition medium, but we finished digitally, although we still had to kick out prints too. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of, it wasn't that controversial. The money was about the same at that time.
The colors,
Yeah.
and the way that the camera moves and the way that actors move through the frame doesn't feel very modern to me.
Yeah, well, the colors, so, but what it's funny is there's a lot of subliminal, so Sophie Beecher is the production designer. She's just a phenomenal UK-based production designer, and she's done a million things, but she was hilarious because we spent quite a bit of time, we built all the interior, and I'd only worked on location, like I'd never built sets before, like it was like a grown-up big movie where you build sets and things. And, you know, we built the entire doctor's surgery, and it was pretty functional floor plan. You could go, you know, through there into the dining room, all of that. And it was built to like 1.5 times scale, right? It was bigger so that we really had room to work. But, you know, I spent a lot of time with Sophie over palette and wallpapers and whatever. And one day she came in pre-production, I'm sorry, I apologize in advance of a terrible British accent, but I can do it, okay, Sophie. But she goes, I've got this wallpaper, it's totally vaggy, and I thought it would be perfect. And I was like, great, run with it. So if you kind of are one of these people who sits and examines, you know, you'll notice that there's these kind of O'Keefe kind of vibe everywhere. We have, you know, floral vases and flowery wallpaper. And so I will say we kind of leaned into the vagina motif quite a bit in kind of the mise en scène. So that was super fun. So in
A
that
phrase
way,
you will never hear again.
who knows, maybe we'll take over the world. In that way, but in the shooting, yeah, I mean, I really spent a lot of time watching Merchant Ivory and watching kind of all the classic, but of that time, really, kind of from the late 90s through till the early 2000s. So I didn't do like the Joe Wright, like I didn't do like little pops of, you know, zooms, but I tried to employ what would have been a more epic kind of romance style rather than a comedy style, and then save these kind of comedy pops for just those little set pieces, you know, like the bit with Molly in the room where we're cutting, you know, to all the stills of like the, yeah, you know, the, what are they, you know, all the petrified animals and things like that. But mostly I just tried to, again, kind of play the filming straight like I wanted the acting, so like classic cinema against this absurd context. And that was the goal, was to make it kind of a seamless, you know, costume drama, and then have this ridiculous thing happening in it.
Or a kind of old-fashioned British comedy. I think of those like Ian Carmichael comedies, you know, which are just so fun and lovely to watch, but kind of decorous at the same time. Because, again, that's misleading with this movie, because you're having a nice decorous laugh, and then you realize like what they're talking about, and you're like, oh my God, that's just obscene. You know, like Ian Carmichael would never have done those things. I don't know if any of you know Ian Carmichael, but he was a kind of British comic actor. Anyway, yes.
One of the things that really struck me, this is the second time I've seen it, was the role that Emily played. And I was seeing so much more the second time that this Victorian idealization of women, which was supposedly complimentary, like you're so pure and wonderful and beautiful and virtuous, you know, no one wants to be on a pedestal, or the pedestal is lonely. You're lonely up there. So I found that interesting, but his kind of realization that, or her realization as well. So could you talk a little bit adding, because against Maggie's character, it was just really showing how women were kind of put in a little box.
Well, I mean, first of all, it helps when you have a fantastic actress in that role,
great.
right? And so I mean, obviously that opens as kind of comic relief. And she doesn't change as a character, but I think it opens as a joke. And then you realize that he's actually going to make this decision, and well, neither of them really have a choice, probably he more than her, and it's clearly not right for either of them. And ultimately, yes, it leads to her own small revelation. Again, watching it now, I realize that the movie is so well executed in the sense that there are so many strands running through, and little, characters, not little, I mean, but little strands and characters and jokes and so on, that all are tied up so nicely. The rhythm of the movie I enjoy so much as it pushes through right to the
Then
end.
for me brings this catharsis when you guys kiss. I mean, it's like what you want out of a romance. Like, oh, they should have been together all along, but it was very complex
Yeah,
and
but
layered.
Felicity's character was by far the hardest to get right in the writing, because I was adamant. The project came to me as a 2-page treatment. I went and found the writers who spec'd it out. And we spent like 2 years getting the script right. And the hardest part was not the easy thing to do in that kind of wrong sister, right sister, standard issue kind of screwball comedy plot, is to make her a shrew, to make her out to get the guy. And the problem is I didn't want to do that. And also, I think it's why that kind of rom-com, like the rom-com as a genre, is kind of broken, because this idea that the stakes that all a woman wants is to get married are like stakes enough to tell a story around is like, I don't buy it anymore. I think it's kind of over. So we wanted to make her character we just want to make them wrong for each other. So we kind of just made her naive, which is a bit of a hard thing to play, and a little dim, but ultimately someone who was just too much under her father's kind of thumb, and whereas Maggie's character was she was 5 years ahead of everyone else. She was that character who could just see a little bit more where it was all going, and it made her an outsider. And so I always loved that scene with you two on the bench at the end, because where you wrap up with Felicity, because I felt like no one was the bad guy here. They kind of realized they were just not right for each other, as you said.
Although I remember doing that scene, and remember we both found it tough to get that note, that tone right, because you can't. It's kind of magical realism. You just starts coming in and wrap it all up, and yeah, this is wonderful, and we're so happy. Bye. And because the goal is to make it smooth and seamless, going back to that idea that I felt like my work and other people's work is so the movie is a smooth experience. So you're kind of sublimating a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you give any thought to how to get into the mindset of somebody from another time when you're playing somebody from another time? Is that something that really crosses your mind, or not?
I think not to the extent of lots of practical research. I think not least because I have done quite a few costume dramas, and I have a sense of the period and a sense of the etiquette. But we did talk about that to a fair degree. Because as Tanya said, it's okay to bend those rules a little bit, but we certainly didn't want to break them, because as soon as you thoroughly bust them, except for maybe Rupert's character, who has carte blanche because he's Rupert, But I was thinking about that watching it again. He is so fun, so much fun to work with, and I was thinking of the time we spent and the amount he made me laugh, and then I realized, wow, there's not a single thing he said I can repeat, because it was just so consistently vulgar and brilliant. but other than maybe him, you know, and some specific jokes, very particular, you know, you want to stay within that world. So we talked about it quite a lot. For example, the scene when Maggie arrives first at the dinner table, you know, having this genteel dinner, and then she barges in. And I remember having a long discussion about whether a woman would ever shake a man's hand. And we ultimately concluded that maybe they wouldn't, but she would, and we would give ourselves the leeway, you know. But that stuff was, we thought about that.
It's interesting because you're not presenting a world that's anthropologically accurate. You know, I mean, like it's something where one of the things that always bothers me about historical films is if the films seem too aware of the fact that this is history and we're all more evolved now. But you kind of can't avoid it with a movie like this. I mean, just hearing the reaction of people in the audience when she's sentenced to, you know, possibly to have unnecessary surgery in prison, and there was a gasp in the auditorium, and you can't get around that. But at the same time, you don't want to be, oh, the past, it was so much more primitive than we are, which may or may not even be true.
Well, one thing I was, you know, and it's funny because for some reason this time period, the 1880s projects keep bubbling up, and these people didn't think, oh, we're so quaint and backwards. They thought, we are on the cutting edge, right? Everything, there was one of the things I read was that, you know, I think it was this is a bit later, but like 1905, in the US, there was a movement on some people's part to close the patent office because we had invented everything. And I just think like, and so I find it both totally like, oh my God, can you believe they thought that, and totally current. I can't, right, there's so many things where I'm like, you know, I know whatever vitamin I'm taking right now or weird health regimen I'm doing, in 5 years I'm gonna be like, well, that was stupid and ill-informed. And so I feel like that's why it felt totally current for me. I wanted to be accurate in design and manner, but that sense that life is happening right now, we are on the most exciting time we've ever lived, was what they felt like, and that's what I think in a way, you know, what I feel like. You know, we're the most progressive, you know, I wouldn't want to be a woman in many other countries and in any other time period ever. Does mean I don't think we have far to go. We have very far to go, but right, and that's I think why that little scene in the classroom to me is like the beating heart of the movie when they, you know, and it goes all pear-shaped and you know whatever, and it was a crazy day we shot that, but I don't know. I just felt like it was alive, and I didn't feel like we had to make it quaint or feel far away to give us that perspective, right? It was supposed to illuminate our own absurdity right now, right? All the telephone jokes and all that stuff, you know?
And then he brings it right to phone sex at the end. He's like, yeah, he gets it. He's
And
like,
then
oh,
you get to
this
have
is
fun
what we're
when
going to
you're
use this
wrapping
for.
it
Yeah, I've heard it said, and I think there's some truth to it, that every medium that's ever been invented was tested first with pornography.
Because everybody uses it? Is that the reasoning?
I think because that's how they're going to make a buck from it, probably.
Right.
Profit centers.
Is there a story or stories that hang in your mind from the making of this? Like when you think of Hysteria, what's the first thing that you think of from the actual shooting?
I mean, honestly, my memory of it is just working very hard. I mean, you know, we filmed, as Tanya said, you know, half it in London, maybe not half, I'm not sure, and then a great chunk in Lithuania where Luxembourg, sorry. I did film in Lithuania, just to be clear, so I'm justified. Yeah, Luxembourg, and you know, so we spent days. So my memory of it, which is ridiculous, is realizing after a week that I wasn't sleeping because I had never filmed so constantly in a studio, and realizing, oh, I'm not getting any daylight, and so I'm just lying awake all night and coming into work, and I'm a physical wreck. But it was. Yeah, and the thing that I've already touched on, which is just constantly, it was quite an insecure for me feeling making this movie because I knew what I was aiming for, but I could never be sure that I was getting the right tone at any given time.
Duck fucking.
Yeah,
That was impossible to find. That footage, I spent as much time looking for that footage. We could not get that footage.
Now, did you hold auditions
Nowadays,
for the
if you
ducks,
typed
or-
duck fucking into Google, I can assure you, you would. Anyway,
Because
never mind.
every medium, well, no.
Did you have duck wranglers? Did you have to sit there and wait until they
Yeah.
were in the mood,
Yeah.
or what
No,
happened?
we had duck wranglers, but it turns out they don't shag on command. It's super irritating. So we had the duck wranglers, they were hopeless. We could kind of get the ducks in the pathway, as you saw, but then to get the actual cutaways, I had one of the guys on the crew, the boom operator, the guy who holds like the big microphone up, his like, what he secretly wanted to be was a naturalist cinematographer. So anytime he wasn't kind of working on the sound crew, he was, this is George, was, taking courses. And so I found this out and I was like, great, because we had like no money left. And so I said, okay, great, there's this duck pond, and I got the producers to like scrounge some, I don't know, like 500 pounds together, whatever, to pay George to go spend his days off. I think he did all throughout post. 10 days. I have hard drives full of duck porn. And it was super irritating because then I finally got some amazing duck shagging shots. And I really have a lot to say about this. And so I was really excited. I'm sitting there with my, looking through all the footage. And it didn't match the ducks we had in the shots with, Hugh and Felicity. So it was all like hours and hours of wasted duck footage. Then I rented a camera, 5D, and I went out into the field on my weekends while we were cutting and tried to get the shot. I couldn't, and I'm scrounging all these image banks. I called the BBC, we called, Nat Geo. There's nothing. There's nothing. And I have one of our producers is the lovely Sarah Curtis, who produced Mrs. Brown, Englishman Who Went Up a Hill, all of that, and she was scrounging through every corner of the universe. And another producer was a woman named Judy Cairo, who what was the movie with Maggie and Jeff Bridges?
Crazy Heart?
Yes. Yeah.
Crazy Heart. She produced that, and Judy's from the South, and she walks in. I mean, we are a week away from locking picture, and she goes, Tanya. And I said, yeah. She goes, I think we're going to have to consider a duck fucking free movie. And I was like, no way. She goes, well, what about animal that's easier to get to do it on film? And I'm like, no way. Like, she suggested rabbits. I thought that was cliche. It was really tearing me up inside. So one night, in the middle of the night, I'm searching and Googling, and I'm searching Pond 5, which is like, just like a stock footage bank, and I had looked through all of them a million times, but I just thought, and there, like a golden thumb, was all of a sudden this like Norwegian naturalist had posted 5 shots, and I did. And this is the thing about better to ask forgiveness than permission. I slapped my credit card down and I bought the highest level, the fully globally cleared rights. And I walked in, and we were I think we had locked the picture, except I had placeholders in. And I went into the DI, which is where they kind of color correct the thing. And I walked in and I was like, just cut these shots in to the guys. Because I didn't tell the producers because they were already, figuring out how to just finish it without it. And I was terrified that it would look terrible because it was shot on, we shot on film, it was on digital, whatever. And I went up to the editor. I said, I don't know. I found these shots. They're right, but maybe they're not going to probably cut in and they whatever. And he goes, well, you mean the ones that are in the DI now? And they were literally perfect, perfect. So it's a very long way of saying, basically leave no stone or duck unturned. I mean, 3 days before we locked picture, I finally got the shagging ducks in the movie, and it is my favorite bit. Therefore,
I love the idea of you. I love the idea of you making sure to pay for global rights for the duck footage.
oh yeah,
So that they're not watching it in Norway and that scene comes up and it says scene not available in
Exactly.
Norway or something.
just little, kind of witness protection blurring.
And the button is the female duck being like, ooh, that was fabulous.
Yeah,
you know, like
it
a
was
little,
good. Little shake.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there may be people who have questions. Could we ask a few questions, perhaps? Let me see if there's, we have, okay.
Down
Maybe
here.
Start, yeah, down in front there. This lady.
Here?
Yeah.
Across
Where are
the
we?
next aisle.
Oh, never mind. I think
Oh,
the
well.
microphone runners are taking the lead here, so.
To your right here.
Question for Tanya. So you said the movie's about denial. The interesting thing I noticed was the first words were, "This is a true story, really," and the last words were the legal disclaimer that it had nothing to do with reality. Have you thought about that? It's real denial.
No. The first words I put on the movie, the last words the producers put on the movie. So I think, right, every movie, even true stories, kind of have a legal disclaimer, but that is a hilariously, I don't know, I guess I was in denial about that.
Anybody else? Yes, down in front.
Hi, Tanya, I thought the film was just absolutely beautiful. I thought that the restraint that was shown, Hugh, that was beautifully, the timing was beautiful. I was wondering that was Maggie Gyllenhaal the only non-British cast member? That was interesting that everything else was all British, and she did a beautiful accent. How did you happen to come across casting Maggie Gyllenhaal? I think she was a great choice.
Thank you. She was always, you know, kind of, this movie it took a long time, but casting was a kind of magical experience because I wrote a list of, 5 actors for each role, 1 for Mortimer. But for the rest, but I mean, what's funny is that actually I'd seen Hugh a few years before in a play on Broadway, and I went, like that guy, you know what I mean? I flipped out. And so it took a bit to put it all together, but kind of got everyone we wanted. And as I said, one of the producers had produced Crazy Heart, was able to get it to Maggie. And she had done Nanny McPhee or Nanny McPhee 2. And so the British, producer, who was the lead producer, I kind of relied on her. I have a fairly good ear, but I was like, you have to tell me, what you think. Do you buy this? And we knew that Maggie was kind of knocking it out of the park when, after she rapped, we knew while she was filming, but after she rapped, one of the crew members who had not seen her in other stuff, because she only spoke in a British accent from the day she, hit the set till she rapped, because she said it's too hard to toggle back and forth. But then, I think on the day we rapped, her daughter showed up, and she was 5 at the time, and she didn't want to freak her daughter out, so she spoke American to her, and one of the crew members was like, "What?" He was British, but she said, "I'm not going to do it." She's British, and I was like, "Oh, okay, we're good." Yeah, so that was a real vote of confidence.
Another one, yes.
Yes, we have time for one more question in the balcony to your right.
Over there.
We have a story that comes down through our family from the 19th century about a local community blacksmith who was approached by women in the community, and the way it was described, and this is a little bit about vocabulary, the way it was described, the blacksmith had reported to some people, and this is how it got passed over to our family. He said, "These women come to me, he said, and want me to go upstairs," he said, "and ask if they can be diddled." And he said, "I would diddle them." Do you know if this is, first of all, a term that was used? And secondly, would the blacksmith have a certain advantage?
I think I can take both those questions. I can report with authority that diddling is a British term. And yes, it does describe that activity. And you would have to assume that as a blacksmith, he was a man who worked with his hands all day long and was probably the guy to go to. And indeed, you know, would have had toughened and calloused skin.
And on that note, thank you all for coming out. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.